go into chapter 5 of Galatians, and because he's going to go now into this idea that we have this freedom and this liberty and this access to power to live out our faith. He talks about in chapter 5 Christian liberties, Christian power, Christian responsibility, and how the same power that raised Christ from the dead, we as believers have access to that same power to live our lives as Christians. And that power that raised Christ from the dead gives us the power to live a spirit-filled life. But living this spirit-filled life, we have to overcome the temptation of the flesh. And our flesh is wanting to fight against the spirit controlling us to help us to live a spirit-filled life or a spirit-led life. Now, I really want y'all to get this, because this is important to really understand that you have your flesh you live in, and then you have the spirit that is alien to your flesh. The spirit has to be invited in or come in. R.C. Sproul would say that the spirit comes in intentionally, because God knows who's going to be saved, and God has already saved who's going to be saved. And so the doctrine of predestination says that God comes in and saves you. And Jesus says, no man comes to the Father except the Father draws him or saves him. And so that's involuntary, or whether it's voluntary, the Spirit comes in to live in us to help us to live the Christian life with success. But what's fighting against that is our flesh. And so in chapter 5, Paul's going to talk about the struggles you and I have to overcoming the temptation of the flesh. It is quite a temptation. It is a struggle to live as a Christian as long as you live in your body, because your body represents your flesh. Your flesh is weak. Read, y'all know what I'm talking about. Don't sit there and act like y'all don't know what I'm talking about. Y'all know y'all flesh weak. You've been saved a long time. You're getting a little up there in the years, but it don't make no difference. Your flesh still weak. I mean, you want to get a little drink of whiskey every now and then. You want to get a little drink of whiskey. And if you don't want no whiskey, you want a little sugar. But either way, you're still tempted. And so he's going to talk about this, and he's really going to give some clarification and some amplification with this struggle that we have with the flesh. The flesh is weak, and he's going to talk about, but the spirit is very willing to submit to the power of God and the Spirit of God, but the flesh fights against that constantly. Constantly, it is fighting against that. And he's going to talk about in that Romans text that every time I have a desire to do good, evil is present in me. We struggle to live a spirit-filled life because the flesh fights against us living a spirit-filled life. And so that's what he's going to talk about. And I'm going to give it to you. I'm not going to do every verse, but I'm going to talk about what Paul talks about in this particular text, and how this idea of being justified by faith, not by the works of the law, not by works of righteousness, but by the law. But Paul says now in chapter 5, there's great access to power for us to live a spirit-filled life and a spirit-led life. But the dilemma we have is that our flesh fights so hard against us being spirit-filled and being spirit-led. And he's going to talk about how we can really win the battle of the spirit fighting against the flesh, or the flesh versus the spirit, and how we need to make sure that we don't feed the flesh, that we starve the flesh. We don't give the flesh any room to grow or to be strengthened. If we do, it's not going to allow us to be spirit led or spirit filled. And so that's really what I want to talk about. And he really kind of makes this argument. He really starts talking about that in verse number 7. And the first 6 verses is just a recitation over this Christian liberty that we have now, that we are saved by faith, and by faith through faith, and not by works of righteousness, not by the law of Moses, but we're saved by grace. That's what he's going to talk about, this idea of justification. And then he's going to talk about in verse 7, he says, you run well, who hinder you from obeying the truth. And this persuasion does not come from him who called you, because he talks about in verse 9 that a little leaven lumps the whole loaf, or the whole loaf of bread. And he says, I have confidence in you, in the Lord, and that you will have no other mind. But he who troubles you shall bear his witness whenever he is. And then he's gonna start just making this argument that you can't afford to get distracted, and you can't afford to have people to persuade you or to persuade you to lose focus. And he's going to talk about there are some people who you need to cut yourselves off, or you need to really not allow them to influence you in a negative way. And then you need to make sure that you don't let them allow your flesh to be fed, because they are fleshly people and they try to entice your flesh and feed your flesh, and they feeding your flesh prevents you from being spirit-led and living a spirit-filled life. And so that's what I want to talk about here. But then he's going to talk about this principle in verse 14, that the law fulfilled in one word, even in this, that you shall love your neighbors as you love yourself. And he's going to talk about love, but and then he's going to talk about that you got to be careful that you live a life of love, because that's going to help you to live a spirit-filled life. But then he's going to talk about the things that get in the way of you loving your neighbor and living a spirit-filled life and a spirit-led life. And then he's going to start talking about in verse 16, walking in the Spirit, Walking in the Spirit. He's going to explain it in such detail. Now, he's going to talk about 2 things. He's going to talk about the 15 things that prevent you from walking in love and loving your neighbor as you love yourself, because these things are fleshly. Then he's going to talk about the fruit of the Spirit. And these 7 things that he's talking about that are contained in the fruit of the Spirit will help you live a spirit-led life and walk in the Spirit. But he's going to name 15 things that get you caught up. And I'm not going to deal with all 15, but I'm going to deal with the ones that are mentioned in this text. And listen, you think when he talks about the flesh in chapter 5 of Galatians, he is talking about sexual sins, but he's not only talking about sexual sins, he lists some other stuff in there. You can be fleshly and give in to your physical lust that leads to sexual immorality, but there's some other stuff you can do that also is connected to your flesh. Because he's going to mention a word in there, jealousy. Is a fleshly behavior that keeps you from loving your neighbor as you love yourself. Envy is another one. He's going to say that is a fleshly behavior, that is a behavior that is not an attribute of a spirit-led or a spirit-filled person. Go ahead. Yeah. What is the difference? And I'm going to explain that to you. Hold up now. Let me explain those to you. The difference between jealousy and envy. Jealousy is you looking at somebody. You have to see something. It is something that is is something that is uh, ignited from what you see. It's really about covetousness because you see what somebody else have and you want it, and you're jealous that they have it and you don't. That is jealousy. Envy is this thing that is within you. Envy is this thing that is an irritation and an aggravation in you that you're not living up to your full potential, but you see other people living up to their full potential, and because you're not or you can't, you feel angry and bitterness and resentment toward people. Make sense to you? Because when you envy somebody, you are dissatisfied with where you are and with what you have. And you don't verbalize it as much. But envy is this desire, it is this unsatisfied feeling that you have about your own life and your own condition. You see other people who have achieved what you have not, and it stirs up anger, aggravation, resentment, jealousy, and hate in you. Not because of what somebody else is doing, which is jealousy, is when you see somebody else doing something. But envy is when you see yourself doing nothing, but you see somebody else doing something, and you wish you could, but it is beyond your ability to do, and you can't achieve it. And so you have the attitude, if I can't have it, they can't either. And I'll do everything I can to destroy it, what they have. That's envy. But jealousy is this idea of seeing somebody else being really recognized and honored, having a level of success, and you covet to have it. It's you covet to have it, and you just see them. I see you drive a new car, and it makes me jealous because of the car that I have, or that I can't have it. I don't have access to it. Envy is you do not live up to your potential. And it ain't got nothing to do with, now this ain't got nothing to do with you. It's got to do with me. I'm mad because I ain't doing what I'm supposed to do. And it creates envy in me. So I'm not really angry at you. I'm really angry at me. But when I see you doing what I should be doing or ought to be doing, it creates envy in me. It makes me hate you. Not that I couldn't do or couldn't have what you have, but I'm so dissatisfied with my own lack of progress, success, drive, motivation, and taking the initiative to make things happen. Now I see you doing them, and it irritates me that you're doing them. You making things happen. And so I start envying you. Then I start undermining you. Then I start criticizing you. And it's from self-hate. That's how I define envy, is self-hatred for yourself. You see everybody doing what you could do or what you ought to be doing to have what they got, but because you're too lazy, you ain't got no drive, you ain't got no motivation, and it really ain't your wheelhouse or you ain't your thing, you're never going to be able to do that because that's not what God called you to do. That's not what you're purposed or skilled to do. So why are you envying somebody? Now, jealousy, you could make some things happen because if another person go get a new car, you could get one if you get a job making the same amount of money and handle your money better. Envy is the green-eyed monster because it is something that is from within. And I'm gonna explain that to you even further. Let me give you, I can't give you all of it, but he's talking about these are the things that prevent you from living a spirit-led life and a spirit-filled life. He gonna list, I can't do all of them. They start in verse 19. I promise I can't do all of them because he's gonna list about 15 of them. And I'm gonna give you the ones that I think are most relevant. That if you habitually and with malice and forethought engage in these things, it hinders you from living a spirit-filled life and a spirit-led life. The first thing he says in that verse is adultery, fornication, uncleanness, and lewdness. Now, all of those can be put into one category. Now let me explain these to you. This is the word fornication is a Greek word that means it means pornography or pornographic or pornea, and it is illicit sexual activity, including but not limited to adultery, premarital sex, homosexuality, bestiality, incest, and prostitution. He says those kind of behaviors prevent you from living a spirit-led life. And I'm going to give them to you again. When these that he mentions in this one verse, which is verse 19, they include adultery, premarital sex, homosexuality, bestiality, incest, and prostitution. If you do those things, when he says adultery and fornication, and he talks about uncleanness and lewdness, these are sexual sins, and it is included in all of these. All of those things can prevent you from living a spirit-led life. Now, I can't say too much because I'm going to put this on Facebook and I put me in Facebook jail. But I'm just trying to explain to you that these things prevent you. He says these things get in the way of you living a spirit-led life. This is your flesh. Now, I'm going to tell you, your flesh want to do all of these things. You are created and built to have desires. Listen, lust is a legitimate desire that God created you to have. It is normal for you to lust after somebody of the opposite sex. Opposite sex. When you see a man, you're supposed to go, woo-wee. Like when Miss Jefferson saw me at that banquet, she just didn't know what to do with herself. She like, woo, look at my baby look good. And she just kept saying it, boy, my pastor look good. She almost said, my pastor looks sexy. She almost said it. It almost slipped. She almost slipped the slip of the tongue. She said, whoo, look at it. He just look good. That's good because that is a natural desire, but it becomes lust when that legitimate desire gets out of control. And you can't control that, and you walk around like a dog, run around like a dog in heat. Uncontrollable, and there are no limits. There are no leashes on you. And so he talks about those kind of things prevent you from living a spirit-led or a spirit-filled life. And that is because those things appeal to our flesh. And we are about satisfying our flesh. If the truth be told, our flesh is important. Because why did Eve eat from the forbidden tree? Because it was going to make her feel good, because it tasted good, and it was going to give her an experience. Now, let me give you the second thing. Now, this lewdness refers to excessive behavior and a lack of restraint. Now, I'm going to explain this to you. Don't get mad. Lewdness refers to any excessive behavior and a lack of restraint that eventually is associated with sexual excess and indulgence. But it is a lack of restraint, excessive behavior. And you can do that sexually, but you can also do that through eating. Because gluttony is a sin, an excessive behavior. You can do it with gambling. You can do it with drinking. Lewdness is this excessive behavior that lacks any restraint, and you have no ability to restrain yourself or to discipline yourself to know when it's too much. Make sense to you? Because listen, the Bible says it ain't nothing wrong with drinking, but you ain't supposed to drink to get drunk. You see what I'm saying? It's okay to eat, but you're not supposed to be a glutton where you just eat and eat and eat, because that is a fleshly thing. Your body desires to satisfaction. Buffet gets you every time, don't it? You're supposed to go there and get one plate. You done been back about 10 times. And you know you don't feel like eating nothing else, but your eyes is bigger than your appetite. You just got to have it. Got to taste everything on that buffet. And so that's what he's talking about. Now, verse 20, I'm going to deal with one word in there that's going to cover a lot of stuff in there. Now, this idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousy, outbursts, wrath, selfish ambition, delusions, and heresy. Now, listen, let me give you one word I really want to talk about, because the first one was about sexual sins, the second one was about excess and not able to restrain yourself. And you cannot live a spirit-led life and a spirit-filled life if you have no discipline, when you don't know when to call it quits. We're going to get to that one. I just said, hold on. We're going to get to that one. I'm trying to explain this one to you. And lewdness, I told you, fornication, it covers all of those sins. Lewdness is the lack of self-control. Don't know when to call it quits. It is the lack of restraint. You overindulge. And then sorcery and witchcraft is the Greek word for that is pharmakoneia. If I'm pronouncing it right, it means pharmacy, which is drugs. Sorcery. It is the Greek word. It is this English word that we use called to use the word pharmacy. It comes from referring to medicine in general, but eventually alters the mood and the mind, and which leads to the occult, witchcraft, and magic. See, this is the issue. Drugs are not new to our society in humanity. Pagan people have always used drugs to alter the mind, which is a form of witchcraft. They didn't have marijuana and the drugs that we have today, but they had mushrooms and other kind of exotic plants that alter the mind. There is a honey in a tribe in Asia, up in the mountains, the honey that those bees produce puts you in a hypnotic state. And some people who have taken this honey says that it makes you feel dead but yet alive, and it takes you to the underworld, or to what is called a state of nirvana. But it alters your mind. It causes you to lose the ability to make reasonable and rational thoughts. That's what sorcery is. And if you get caught up in this sorcery, this witchcraft, this idolatry, this sorcery, it prevents you from living a spirit-led life. And that's the reason where we get the word pharmacy, is this idea, and that's what Paul is talking about. You don't need to consume things that alter your mind, which alters your judgment, which causes you to live in a hypnotic state, to where you make rational decisions in an irrational way that is devastating. So that's what he literally means. So he's going to talk about all of these things in verse 20. Idolatry, which is a word that is an occultish word, or the occult, which is worshiping an image, a physical image, or something that is physical that you can see, because he says, thou shalt have no other God before me. Thou shalt not make any graven images. And God considers that adultery. And the reason why so many of these pagan religions in early existence of civilization, because they ingested mind-altering drugs that gave them this euphoria, this hypnotic state. And so he talks about that can prevent you from living the spirit-led life. And then he's going to talk about contentions and heresies. And this is this idea of now I'm going to give it to you. You see, it says contentions and heresies. Many of these sins are manifested in the area of human relationships and have something to do with they form from anger and hatred that leads to strife and jealousy and outburst of wrath and unrestrained expressions, and you just don't have any self-control of your emotions. That you just are a person who will just snap on anybody, just be loud, and you always trying to give somebody a piece of your mind. Because and when he talked about this contentions and heresies, he's talking about uh, anger that leads to hate, contentions that lead to strife, jealousy that leads to hateful resentment, outbursts of anger, which is unrestrained expressions of hostility. You are just an angry person, a jealous person, a person who cannot control your emotions. You cannot be spirit led and spirit filled if you are a person who is so angry that you give in to every one of your emotions. Now let me tell you, you sometimes you get angry before you ever come to church. But you at church now. Nobody at church made you angry. So you shouldn't go off on somebody because they speak to you and say, how you doing? Or because they get, quote, your seat. A person who cannot control their emotions and who have outbursts of anger and they spew hatred with their words, those kind of people will never be spirit fed or spirit led. And then strife is just, strife is just something that you just mad at everybody and don't nothing make you happy. And so you got this level of strife or this level of contention against just everybody. You just jealous. So somebody get a new car, get the haircut, wear a new dress. You just get upset about everything because you got so much in you. I'm not sick of y'all. All the hell in you. People with a lot of hell in them will raise a lot of hell. People who are not happy will try to spread a lot of unhappiness. Because people who are not right with themselves, right within themselves, will try to create that chaos in any environment that they go into. You ain't happy at home, you ain't happy at work, you ain't happy in your social circle, so you bring that mess out here to the church, and you want to bring that same unhappiness because there's so much strife and jealousy in you that you want to tear this up. And that hinders you from living a spirit-led life. I mean, why are you so unhappy? Change your situation. Make some of your decisions that are different. Make some different choices. And so we're going to talk about that. And then let me give you this in verse 21, drunkenness and rivalries. And this is just being, this is rowdy and boastful and rowdy and boisterous and crude behavior. This is just some folk, they just nasty. Just nasty. Just nasty. I saw a little bit of it Sunday. Just nasty. Just get up and just do some just silly stuff. Wear anything, do anything, disruptive. Now listen, I'm telling you, if you know that, and I'm gonna say this, and I say it because I'm pastor, and I had a deacon at the other church, deacon candidate at the other church, stand up and rebuke the congregation for something that went on, and had the congregation jump down his throat because he said, listen, that distracts everybody and don't do that. This is still the church. And some of the members at Siloam got really upset. Okay, if you know the way you dress is going to be a distraction, don't dress that way. You're being rowdy and boisterous and cruel. And if somebody say something to you, you ain't got the spirit. You all in your flesh because we know that because of the way you dress. And if you gonna get up and walk out of church, don't come in the first place. Especially right in the middle of church. You got time to get up and walk out before the preacher ever get up. But don't get up right in the middle of when the preacher is preaching, because you're being that's boisterous and distracted, disrespectful. And you got people, and he's talking about that's drunkenness. That's just the people who just ain't got no sense of restraint and behavior, subtleties or temperance. They just get up and just are so distracted. Just want you to say something to them so they can snap on you. Or they do it to be confrontation. You see what I'm saying? They do it intentionally. So you can say something so they can start some more mess. They put fuel on the fire. They want you to confront them so you can say something, and then it can be a big, as the pastor would say, cabal, blow up into some big mess. And so sometimes you just have to ignore those people, But my deacon at the other church, he confronted somebody right when he was taking up the offering, and just called him out. And then nobody said anything to him when the church during that, but when church was over, they jumped all down and stuff. But he was right. He's right. But see, some people do controversial things to garner a reaction from you, or to get you to say something, and they know that stuff is outrageous and ridiculous. They thought he shouldn't have said nothing. They thought he shouldn't have said, but he thought he shouldn't have said nothing. I got to get on to these fruits, the fruit of the Spirit, okay? Because these are things that keep you from living a Spirit-led life and walking in the Spirit. So in verse 22, these are the 15 things. I didn't deal with all 15. I condensed them into about half of that, which is 6 things. But now, those things will prevent you from living a Spirit-led life. Now, your flesh going to want to do all those things I just mentioned. All the 15 things that are mentioned in chapter 5, starting with fornication, which includes illicit sexual activities, which includes adultery, premarital sex, homosexuality, bestiality, incest, prostitution. Lewdness, which is excessive behavior and the lack of restraint and control, being able to not overindulge in certain risky behaviors. Sorcery deals with not consuming drugs that alter your mood or your behavior or your mind, and that leads to the occult, witchcraft, and magic. Most people who do drugs, they are into the occult, witchcraft, and magic. Then he's talking about contentions and heresies. He's talking about this idea of anger that leads to hate, and then this contention that leads to strife, jealousy that leads to this resentment of outbursts of sudden wrath, and suddenly you unrestrained to express your anger, your frustration, and you will go off and snap on anybody. All of that prevents you from being Spirit-led. And drunkenness and rivalries, this is this rowdy, boisterous, and cruel behavior. These things, Paul warns, prevents you from living a Spirit-led life if these behaviors become habitual actions. See, somebody ought to be able to confront you and tell you when you are out of order. James says that if you point out the error of a man's ways, you save his soul from death. Now, I will agree that in the church today, we let people get away with too much. And the more you let them get away with, the more people will do. They have no restraint to say nothing. And some people, and I know somebody right now in this church, they trying to edge me on to say something to them. They're trying to set up a confrontation. I ain't gonna get trapped into that. But I'm just telling you. Okay, let me give you verse 22. Now you do understand this is not Gladys fruits. You don't see no S on the word fruit. It's fruit, plural. Now within this fruit, he's going to say within the fruit of the Spirit, there are, it's like saying in an apple, it's one apple, but there are many benefits. There are vitamins and minerals within that apple, because the apple away keeps the doctor away. You eat one apple and there are many benefits. And what he's saying, there is a fruit of the Spirit, but if you consume or live out these fruits of the Spirit in your behavior and character and conduct, there are a lot of different benefits. He said the fruit of the Spirit, not fruits. So let me give them to you what they are. The first one is simply love. You know, we started out in verse 14, for all the law is fulfilled in one word or in one phrase, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thou love thyself. Just love. People don't feel love. People don't show love. People don't express love. And people don't know how to love. We are so judgmental, so harsh, so cruel. Love. It's so simple. Let me give it to you what he says here. This attribute of God that we are to express, it is not an emotional affection, it's not a physical attraction, or not a familial bond, but it is about respect, devotion, and affection that leads to self-sacrifice. willing to lead and to self-sacrifice yourself for the service and the good of others. You love somebody when you are willing to put them first above yourself, when you're willing to sacrifice for the good of somebody else, and there's no benefit for you. And when you're willing to give of yourself something that belongs to you that would serve somebody else in a beneficial way. Love. You remember when we used to have love that ran from heart to heart, breast to breast? When if I had it, you had it, that's love. You didn't want to see anybody fall between the cracks, and you wanted to make sure everybody had what they need. That you made sure that people were able to benefit from your possessions. And you demonstrated that by giving something that was yours to somebody else or willing to go serve somebody else. I remember my grandfather had a stroke, and it was at the time when it was time to plant the harvest, and he had a stroke in the hospital. They took him to the hospital. His neighbors came and planted his harvest. That's love. They weren't going to let Roosevelt's harvest not get in the ground. Big Mama and my mama and Hattie Sue and them couldn't do it, but the men folk did it. And so the men came and made sure that Roosevelt's harvest got in the ground. That's love. And then another illustration of love. When Roosevelt killed a pig, everybody got a piece of that pig. That's love. That is love. It was yours, but you shared what you had with somebody else for somebody else's good and benefit. You sacrificed. You could have used it for yourself and kept it all to yourself, but you were sacrificial in your possession of it to give for the good and the benefit of others. That's love. That's a fruit of the Spirit. Now let me give you this joy. Joy is within this fruit of the Spirit. And joy is based on unchanging divine promises and eternal spiritual realities. It is excessive expression between a person in God and a person in other people. Joy is the result of favorable circumstances and unfavorable circumstances, painful circumstances and joyful circumstances, severe circumstances, or unpleasant circumstances. Joy literally means your circumstances or your condition in life does not determine whether or not you're happy. Now listen, I'm not saying knowing and finding out that you're sick gonna make you happy, but it ought to at least put you in a position to where you have a level of joy. Joy has to do with this blessed assurance that even though I've got bad news, it's not all bad news because I belong to God. You see what I'm saying? So I'm sick and it's not looking good. I'm not happy about it, but I still have joy because ultimately God is in control. And my faith is in God. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not to your own understanding, and in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. That's where the joy comes from. You're trusting in God. You're not joyful about being told you got cancer or you got heart disease. That's not what he's talking about. But ultimately, you look to God as your source of joy, and your circumstances or situation does not determine your joy. Then he's going to talk about peace. I ain't talking about peace that comes from man, but peace comes from God. Jesus says, my peace I give unto you, not as the world gives, but as I give. Peace is a fruit of the Spirit, and this is this internal calm. You ain't shaking like other folk are shaking. See, some of y'all, when y'all heard we was at war, y'all start stocking up on pork and beans and tissue paper and thinking the world coming to an end. No, don't do that. The Lord gonna take care of you. The Lord gonna take care of you. I promise you He is. Now listen, and y'all quit acting for I've been snapped on you. Now you thought COVID was gonna kill you. You still here? You thought Trump being president, that it was over. We still here. Thought high gas prices, oh, I'm gonna lose all my money savings in retirement. You still got it. So you don't panic. I mean, you don't lose your mind. When the circumstances outside of you become chaotic, troubling, and disruptive, you stay calm. The Lord got you. Him being for you is greater than the whole world against you. And that ought to give you peace. You remember Elijah was taken care of, even though there was a drought, the Lord took care of him at the wood of Zoaphat's house, first by the brook. And see, God gonna take care of his own. And you rest on that assurance, on that promise. Let me give you this one, long suffering. And this simply means you got to be patient with folk. So you got to be patient with folk. Patience, long suffering is you got to be patient with folk. You got to let some things work out. See, don't ever judge the quality of a relationship by a temporary conflict or disagreement. Me and Pastor and I had 100 disagreements. And we did not define our friendship as pastor and member based on those short-term conflicts and dissolve our friendship and our relationship because we had a short-term conflict. Long suffering is let time heal some wounds. Let's live to fight another day. Circumstances might change, my feelings might change, but don't dissolve a relationship because you have a disagreement today or a conflict. Listen, be long suffering, be patient, let some things work themselves out. And if you are long suffering, some feelings might be healed, some wounds might be healed. But see, don't do that though, because you never know when you might need people. Okay, that's fine. God will create a circumstance where they might be looking up at you. Try your best, but see, that's when you have to. But see, the problem is because you don't know when to shut up and walk away and let it alone. And don't pour fuel on the fire, alcohol in the wound. Say, okay, I get it. You upset, you mad. Okay, listen, always leave the door open for reconciliation. Don't agitate them. Just move on and say, the last thing you need to say when you get to that situation, I love you, and if you need me, I'm here for you. And let it alone. Speak to him and don't try to make nothing happen, but let things happen. Let me give you this. And then he talks about kindness is in the fruit of the Spirit. Kindness is tender concern for others, and it's how you treat people with gentleness. And then goodness is moral and spiritual excellence manifested in kindness. And believers are to exemplify kindness and goodness. Kindness is the affection we have. Goodness is this idea that you serve the best interest of everybody. You always want to make sure that whatever you do and whatever happens to a person is going to be for the good. You should never want nothing bad to happen to anybody. And you shouldn't do nothing to co-sign anything happening bad. If you know it's going, somebody come to you and say, man, if you help me, this ain't going to work for this person. Say, look, I'm not in that. Because the fruit of the Spirit is goodness. You say, I ain't going to have nothing to do with that. Because that's going to hurt them more than it's going to help them. So I'm not in that. And then he talks about this one, self-control is a fruit of the Spirit. Self-control. Self-control is an important thing. Listen, you got to know that there are some limits that you got to put on yourself. Some things you can't do. Just because you got a right to do them and freedom to do it and access to do it, you can't do that now. You got to draw the line. If you ain't got no limits, you ain't got no ceiling, and you ain't got no leash, no fence, or no lines to which you say to yourself, I cannot cross them, you cannot live a spirit-led life. You got to have some level of self-control. I mean, you ain't never said no to nothing. And don't nothing make you feel shame enough not to do it? Yeah, they ain't got no self-control. They'll do anything to get what they want or to seek the ultimate or any pleasure. You ain't got no self-control. You got to have some discipline. Now, there are some lines I'm not going to cross, some fences I'm not going to climb, and there are some ceilings I'm not going to try to bust open. It's got to be a ceiling to where, okay, I say, this is where I draw the line. And I ask the Lord never to let me get so far away from him that I can't see the porch light on. That I don't, because when you get there, your conscience has been seared with a hot iron, you've been turned over to your vile affections, and you have a reprobated mind. When you let yourself go too far, you ain't got no self-control. That's what Romans chapter 1 is about. Those were people who went too far. They had no self-control. Women lost the natural desire for a man, men likewise. And because of that, God gave them over to their vile affections. God gave them over to their reprobated mind. And Paul further says that your conscience can be seared with a hot iron to where you won't even be able to discern between right and wrong because you go too far. You do too much. You crash through every ceiling, you cross every line, you jump every fence, and you never put yourself on a leash. You got to say no to yourself. Don't leave it up to somebody else. You say no. Don't be waiting on them to say, no, I'm not going to do that. We can't do that. You make some rules for yourself and set some limits for yourself. Do it make sense to you? Can't nobody make me do nothing. Flip Wilson was not right. Geraldine, the devil made me. The devil ain't made you do nothing. You set some rules for yourself. And in order to do that, there's some places you're not going, some places you're not going to go, some people you're not going to hang around with, some things you're not going to do, some things you're not going to partake in because you are self-disciplined. Some things you can, listen, some things you ain't never done, don't do. Because if you do them, you cross over to the other side. And sin will keep you longer than you're willing to stay, cost you more than you're willing to pay, and keep you longer than you're willing to stay. If you don't have no discipline, it'll take you way further than you're willing to go, cost you more than you're willing to pay, and keep you longer than you wanted to stay. Make sense to you? That we're talking about a spirit-led life.